Hmm. Hello. This is Act 3, Scene 3. As usual, make sure you read it, please. And, yeah. So we're at a point where Romeo has run back to the friar. I think it's interesting to note that he has not run back to his family, and he's also not run back to his friends. He's run back to the friar. Contextually, people would speak to friars and priests and men of religion as a comfort and as a kind of a confidence thing. But also in this case, it is just the fact that, Friar Lawrence is the one who has instigated all of this and has helped out Romeo with the marriage. He doesn't go to his family. If you remember in Act 1, Scene 1, Lord Montague says to Benvolio that, try and find out what's wrong with my son. What's going on with him, whether he's kind of depressed about Rosaline. That kind of ensues this entire situation. So, Lord Montague, caring father, but not the most hands-on father. And remember, that was yesterday in terms of the play's kind of events. Yeah? This is the next morning after the party the night before where they met. And, a couple of hours before that, they decided to go to the party. So it's all very, very, very fast-paced. Also, of course, note that Benvolio is never seen again. Act 3, Scene 1 is the last time he's on stage. Now, obviously, he's a symbol of peace, and it's almost as if the peace has left. Yeah? The chance of peace and the person who asks people to put up your swords, part fools, and for people to calm down and not be bandying in the streets, that person is now gone, and the peace is almost kind of gone, the hope of peace. Because again, on our little narrative arc, we're on the downward spiral right now. So he's run off to the friar, and we see kind of a generational divide in this play. And this is one of the examples of that, where the younger man has gone to the older generation to try and fix his problems. Yeah? Juliet goes to the nurse, and Romeo goes to the friar, both of them to deal with their problems, basically. So we open with Friar Lawrence waiting for Romeo to appear. He's probably heard the news. Yeah? And he says that Romeo is a fearful man. You're scared of everything. Romeo's not in the scene yet. He's just kind of talking to himself. Affliction is enamoured of thy parts, and thou art wedded to calamity. So the idea here that kind of Romeo almost is loved by trouble. Trouble, problems, they all attach themselves to Romeo. Yeah? They love everything about him, and they cling themselves to him. And also that he is wedded to calamity, that he's almost married disaster. Now, obviously two ways of looking at that, where it's obviously an abstracted idea that, he's metaphorically married to this thing called disaster and it always follows him around. But also, he has just got married and it's caused a disaster. So with the idea of disaster coming in, that the wedding was the disaster, that's what happened. Maybe Friar Lawrence is even internally realising that he agreed to this wedding and maybe he shouldn't have. Now, Romeo comes in and he wants to know what the prince's doom was, because obviously Romeo ran off before the prince arrived, so he doesn't know what the actual sentence was. Now, the friar again kind of reminds us that, you are too familiar with sour company. You are too familiar with being in trouble and doing stupid things. Yeah, the friar is meant to be teaching and educating him, not just about religion, but about life. Yeah, kind of a father figure almost. The friar tells him that not body's death, but body's banishment. Now, the friar obviously thinks this is good news, and it is good news compared to what the alternative is. But to Romeo, that's the same thing. He may as well be dead, and that's kind of how he acts for the rest of the scene. Not body's death, but body's banishment. So, your body is not going to be killed, but your body is going to be banished. Now, also, there's also the contextual idea of kind of a soul versus the body. I know we spoke about this last time, that, in religion, the general idea is that people believe that we are more than just stuff. We're more than just kind of flesh, bones, and blood. And there's that kind of idea coming through there that, your body, yes, is banished, but, your souls are still intertwined. You still are married, and your souls are still together, and that's what matters in the eyes of God. Now, Romeo doesn't really respond nicely to it. He says, be merciful, say death. He'd rather be dead. Exile has got more terror in his look. He hates the idea of banishment. He thinks it's ridiculous and horrible and not not in any way good news. And Friar says, the world is broad and wide, that, there's more out there than just in Verona. And obviously Romeo doesn't take kindly to that. He says, there is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, and hell itself. Okay? So purgatory, if you don't know in terms of context, it's the idea of, it was kind of added in by the church much later on, because a lot of child death was happening, during childbirth, for example. And people were saying, well, is my child in heaven? Are they with God? Because, they weren't alive long enough to be baptized and therefore with God. So where are they? And the church kind of had to come up with an answer. So they said, they go to purgatory. So there's this place where all the unbaptized souls go and they wait for judgment from God when, the end of the world happens and Satan fights Jesus and all that jazz. So Romeo compares the situation to that, the world without Verona's walls, so outside of the city, would be torture, it would be hell itself. There is nothing worse in his eyes, because Juliet's in Verona. And, he's not happy with the friar. He says, thou cuttest my head off with a golden axe, and smilest upon the stroke that murders me. So he's saying, it's as if I'm being put to death, and you're smiling on the stroke of the axe that cuts my head off. Now, the friar, again, is trying to educate him, but he's getting a bit sick of it. And to be honest, this is one of the scenes where I start to kind of think, Romeo, you are a spoiled brat. And I know it's a difficult situation, mate, but you need to, get a grip at yourself. This is one of the scenes where I start to dislike Romeo, personally. A lot of people still like him as a character, but this is one of the ones where I just think, you absolute poo-poo. So Friar Lawrence says, O deadly sin, O rude unthankfulness. He's scolding Romeo for not understanding what's going on. You've gotten off lightly. Thy fault our law calls death, but the kind prince, taking thy part, hath rushed aside the law, and turned that black word death to banishment. This is dear mercy, and thou seest it not. I think that line sums up so much of what Romeo is about, that he's not aware, he's ignorant, he's naive. He's been given an absolute lifeline, quite literally, and he doesn't see it. He's almost kind of refusing to see it. So, of course, the friar would be annoyed. I would be annoyed if I was the friar. Yes, I know you clearly love this girl, but you've just been saved from being put to death. You've got the rest of your life to live. What are you doing? And Romeo feels that no one understands him, which is kind of true, to be honest. No one does understand him. No one seems to get what he's feeling. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, actually. Now, Romeo responds by saying, "'Tis torture and not mercy." Now, I'm not going to go through every single little bit of that little, that kind of long speech from Romeo, but I am going to put like a highlighted list up. You should be looking at those quotes and kind of thinking about what you can say about each in terms of AO2, but also AO3 and AO1. But I'm not going to go through them massively, but definitely get them down. Think about why I've highlighted them, for example. What would I probably be asking you to look for if we were in a classroom? This is a scene where the friar is constantly trying to help Romeo, and Romeo's not making it easy for him at all. He's shoving away every helping hand that he gets. And further down the page, we see the reference I was mentioning earlier. Thou canst not speak that thou dost not feel. Now, for this one, Romeo is 100% right here, and Shakespeare sums it up so beautifully. I think that the friar can't empathize. One, the friar has never been in love. He's not allowed to be in love. He's not allowed to be married. He's not allowed to be romantically attracted to people. He was meant to be celibate and serve God for his entire life. But also, not just that the friar hasn't kind of been in love or anything like that, but also that no one, I think, could understand Romeo's feelings at this point, because he's so extreme in his feelings. He's so extreme in his feelings. And he's absolutely right. You can't speak of what you don't know. People can try and sympathise, but no one can empathise with Romeo. I think, actually, to be honest, Romeo is more extreme than Juliet. She is very kind of emotional, emotive and impulsive, but I think he does just take it. He's the one throughout this play that is always putting his heart on his sleeve, and he's always the one that's constantly pushing forward. Again, Juliet does the same, but I don't think quite to the extent that Romeo does. And he's totally right. We can't empathize with him because we've never been in that kind of situation. To be fair, more recent, so it's not really kind of as relevant. But the idea that teenagers and adults do actually think differently. There are different neurological processes and psychological processes that happen in teenagers that don't happen in adults. So when a teenager is arguing with an adult and they don't understand each other, that's because they literally don't have the capability to understand each other. The adult's neurology has moved on to a point where it can't comprehend what teenagers' thought process is, and vice versa. And I think this is kind of an example of that. But Shakespeare kind of presents it as a juxtaposition between the younger generations and the older generations, and that's an absolutely fine way of kind of wording it. Stage directions, really, really key because they're rarely in there. Romeo throws himself down. Okay, so he throws himself to the floor. He's not melodramatic at all, is he? He literally throws himself to the floor and says, taking the measure of an unmade grave. So he says, you may as well draw around me now and mark out my grave because this is it. And obviously we've got foreshadow in there, and also the massively impulsive and melodramatic way that he acts. I think it's important to know, though, that in no way am I implying that he's not genuine in his feelings. I think he genuinely is feeling this bad. It's just that for some reason he's come to this point where he can't control his emotions. It's so volatile. It's so chaotic. Yeah. And 2 people are now dead because of him. Mercutio and Tybalt. Someone he was sworn to love as a friend, and someone he was sworn to love as family, new family as well. But of course, that also foreshadows him kind of causing his own death as well. That it says he throws himself down, that reflexive pronoun. Bit of fancy A-level terminology for you there. Him doing it himself, he's in control of that. And in a similar way, he's in control of his own fate and he causes his own death. Basically, star-crossed lovers take their life. So someone knocks at the door and we find out that it's the nurse. So the nurse comes in and she sees Romeo on the floor and she says, oh, this is exactly what my mistress is doing, what Juliet is doing. He is even in my mistress's case, just in her case, woeful sympathy. The friar says that he's drunk off his own tears, that he is so upset, he's on the floor just screaming. Yeah, extremely, extremely emotional. Now, Romeo is obviously concerned of what Juliet thinks of the situation. What does she think of me? How is she feeling? How is she doing? What's going on? So he calls it the cancelled love. He's already resigned to the fact that no, she can't possibly love me. It's all over. We're starting to understand maybe why he's being so extreme with it, because he thinks he's lost Juliet as well as his best friend and his new family, Tybalt. Now then we get kind of a reference. Now then we get a reference back to the idea of identity and names that we saw in Act 2, Scene 2. And Romeo says, Friar, tell me, in what vile part of this anatomy doth my name lodge? Tell me that I may sack the hateful mansion. Okay? Now, obviously, that's referring to the idea of what's in a name, I hate my name if it means I can't be with you, and that whole bit that we saw in the balcony scene. And we also see a reference to Act 3, Scene 2, so the previous scene, where Juliet calls her love of Romeo a mansion. And he also says the hateful mansion. Yeah? She calls it a mansion of a love, and he calls it a hateful mansion. That my name is the mansion of death, and that, my name is what has ruined everything here. And he draws his dagger. So he's feeling suicidal. He's feeling that there's no point in doing this. I want to either cut out my name or, metaphorically, or cut out my name by erasing myself. So as he draws his dagger, again, a rare bit of stage direction there, Friar says, hold thy desperate hand. Think about that personified noun phrase there. The desperate hand. I think that kind of, again, absolutely microcosmic of Romeo, that he is such a desperate person and he will do anything to try and fix something or make himself feel better. Now, then we go on a whole little bit with Friar Lawrence, and I think this is a great little speech here from Friar Lawrence, a great little monologue. He says, hold thy desperate hand, art thou a man? Thy form cries out, thou art. So, are you a man? Because you look like a man to me. Your form, the way you look, seems like a man. Thy tears are womanish, and obviously contextual there, that women were seen as weak and vulnerable and kind of not able to control anything. And he says, the wild things you're doing are like the kind of irrational fury of a beast. You're not being rational. You're not thinking about things. Again, pointing out his impulsivity. Romeo's impulsivity has been identified there, okay? Then he goes into a whole thing about how, birth is a miracle, that God has given you this right to live, and you want to try and take that away. And, you aren't thinking rationally about this. You're trying to jump to conclusions. You're trying to jump to solutions that aren't going to help you. He talks down here, look, thy noble shape is but a form of wax. So without your honor and without your kind of your resilience, you're just a waxwork. You're just something to look at. You're not a man. You're just a thing. You're just a waxwork. Yeah. So he's really trying to lay it all out for Romeo here. He talks about, again, the kind of ignorance that he has. You are like powder in a skillless soldier's flask. So you're like a really stupid soldier who has got gunpowder, and they accidentally light it and it blows up in their face. You've got all this kind of power and you've got all these things in front of you, but you don't know how to use them. Yeah, he's really, really kind of not laying into him almost, but he's really trying to educate him. He's really trying to get through and explain every little bit and give as many analogies and comparisons as he can. Now then comes a significant part here. Look, there art thou happy. Now this is repeated several times, okay? And he gives him several reasons that he should be happy. So at first he says, thy Juliet is alive, for whose dear sake thou wast but lately dead. So you thought she was dead, but actually she's alive. That's a reason for you to be happy. Tybalt would kill thee, but you killed Tybalt. There is a reason for you to be happy. The law said that you should have been killed, but it becomes your friend and makes it a banishment and exile instead. There you should be happy. Yeah, so he's kind of throwing in his face, look at all these things that you're absolutely tossing out because you're just a spoiled brat and you want what you want, instead of recognizing the situation. You've got so much to be happy for, and yet you're sitting here with a dagger in your hand wanting to stab yourself. Really powerful little bit there of repetition, I think, that he constantly is trying to remind Romeo, and to be fair, Shakespeare's reminding us as well of how much Romeo has gotten away with and how much actually he has to live for. We get another bit of foreshadowing here. Look, take heed, for such die miserable. Please listen to what I'm saying, because so many people in your kind of situation or your frame of mind die absolutely miserable. The most lamentable tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, spoiler alert, does not have a happy ending. So foreshadowing there, definitely. And I think we're also seeing kind of character perspective as well, that Romeo's character perspective is so much different to the friars and anyone else's. But Romeo's character perspective is almost his downfall, because he has this constant internal conflict of wanting to do what he thinks is right for him, but actually, objectively isn't. Now, we come then to the friar's plan. The friar has not yet given up, and this is his plan. He says, get thee to thy love, as was decreed. So as we already agreed, you're going to go and see her. Ascend to her chamber, use the rope ladder that the nurse has given, go and see her, spend the night together, have your time together. And then, that's it. You need to leave, you need to get out and go to a place called Mantua, which is a neighbouring city. He says, we need to wait for a time until we can blaze your marriage, reconcile your friends, beg pardon of the prince, and come back with 20,000 times, more joy than thou wentst forth with. So, you need to go, have your final hours with her, then you need to get the hell out of here until we can figure this out. I will keep in contact with you, I'll send a messenger with any good news, but for now, you need to go. Now, of course, Romeo is only thinking of himself. Romeo says, how well my comfort is revived by this. So as soon as some adult comes in, some older generation comes in, fixes his problems for him, oh, I'm so happy, thanks, yeah. He's not dealing with his own problems. He's not dealing with it himself. He's not developed as a character in that way. The only way he's developed as a character is by showing he's more of a brat than we originally thought. That's pretty much it for this one, and then kind of they just They head off and, you know, they say goodnight to each other. And the plan is in place, but of course we know it's probably not going to go the best to plan. So let's see what happens. Cool. So any questions, let me know, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.